This photograph of the crop duster at night in front of the almond orchard is one of the first art shots I did on this series. About a year and a half ago, I started taking these pictures and painting with light. And this particular experience with the guys that helped me in the whole process of getting the shot, I thought was so interesting and moving. In addition to having kind of a pretty picture, I wanted just to share it with people. So here's the scoop. Some time ago, I wanted to do a photograph of a crop duster at night. I wanted to use one of those kind of modern, old-looking crop dusters with two wings, a biplane, and a big radial engine out front. And I kind of had an idea that I would put it in front of some orchard or trees. So I'm not just photographing this airplane on a runway or in some sort of business or hangar. I wanted to photograph it where it really would live, out sort of in the orchards and the fields and stuff. So what I did was I went onto Google and I typed in, crop dusters in Central California and got a lot of addresses. Then I would take those addresses and I cross-referenced them with satellite photographs, and I looked at each address in a satellite photograph via Google. Ultimately, amazingly, I found this business that showed a photograph of their facility with two airplanes sitting on the tarmac in an orchard right next door. And I thought, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So I called up the business. I explained who I am and talked to the owner, and then they asked, well, what's this all about? And so I explained that I'm a photographer in Los Angeles. I'm trying to take a picture of a crop duster, at night. And their response was, sure, come on up. And well, I explained that, well, it has to be on a certain weekend, because that's when I'm going to be in the area anyway. They said, sure. And I then finally explained that it has to be, at nighttime, because that's when I actually do the pictures. I don't think they got that. And they said, well, come on up. I'm sure we'll figure something out. Anyway, a few days later, I talked with them. They explained that they did have a guy who will stay and work with me to take the picture. I think it's the manager of the facility itself, Jeff. So on the appointed time, I got there a little early, of course, and it was unfortunately raining. But I waited until Jeff showed up, and Jeff came with a friend named Jerry. Jerry was a friend of his who wanted to see what light painting, as I called it, was all about. So there was a couple guys there willing to help me for the shot, which was great. Jeff explained that let's just sit tight, we're already here now, that weather changes very quickly up in this part of the country, and it's very possible that in an hour or so this front will move on and we can take our shot anyway. So it took a while. The weather did finally pass slowly, but just before sunset, maybe an hour before sunset, it looked like we had a little window of opportunity, and we started dragging the airplane and all this equipment and this stuff and junk, and dragging it literally downfield, about midfield to the runway, and backing up as far as we could into the orchard so we can get the shot of the airplane and the orchard and a little, cart with some flags and a fuel drum and all that stuff, and putting it together. As we were doing all this, we're working very hard. We're kind of focused on the composition and the equipment and the airplane, not so much about the weather, and we realized just before we're getting ready to shoot that the weather has totally changed. The windsock has stood out in the opposite direction, and indeed a big front was coming right toward us out of the blue. We were not even aware of it. At a good 8 knots, so it was a pretty stiff breeze, and you could see the darkness of the clouds really rolling in upon us. So we realized we have to really hustle. We got everything together, got my camera, the tripod, the ladders, all the equipment and cables, and just it's like a mountain of technology to make these things happen, and we're pretty much set. Just when we're about to literally start taking the first photograph, it starts to sprinkle. And I thought, oh no, it's like we got all this way. So these guys, which was really great, they had said, Eric, we've gone all this way, we're all set up. If you're up to it, we're up to it. We'll go for it if you want. So I dragged, luckily, a huge umbrella from my car, gave it to Jerry. He's the guy that was basically holding it over the camera. So I had Jeff, who's the, facilities manager and mechanic, and I guess wears all the hats. He was under the tripod, opening and closing the shutter for me, electronically with a cable. And Jerry, who's basically a friend of a friend, or the friend of the guy who runs the facility, he was at the top of the ladder holding this very large umbrella at arm's length just over the camera itself, and was kind of underneath it himself. It was kind of neat. And I noticed, as we're starting to shoot, it starts to rain pretty heavily. Luckily, this technique I'm using, where I'm painting with light over multiple exposures, the camera doesn't see the rain or necessarily even me sometimes. The camera only sees what the light touches. So as I paint with light on the airplane and the wheels and the engine, that's what is exposed, even though it's raining. After a few minutes, I'm kind of noticing that it's really coming down almost in buckets. It's almost torrential and quite nasty of an experience all the time. I'm getting rained on. As I just casually looked over to Jeff and Jerry's at the top of this 9-foot tall oily ladder in the rain and holding the umbrella kind of over both him and the lens. And I noticed the water is just coming off the tip of the umbrella and just going past the lens. So I explained that, hold the umbrella a little further out, because if the water hits the camera, not only is that bad, but it'll make the photographs blurry, and then what's the point? So, he dutifully did as he was told and held the umbrella a little further out. And so I just thought, okay, we're great, we're rock and rolling, I got it in the groove, and I'm exposing shot after shot as quickly as I can. At some point, very quickly, the whole environment of the orchard was just covered in mud, and I'm a mess. All of my batteries and stands and lights and packs and cables were just totally soaked. All this time I'm thinking to myself, it's my photograph, I'm working hard, it's going to be really difficult, we got to go really fast to make this thing happen. And then, toward the end, we only got about 90 photographs exposed before I basically just had to stop. It just was coming down in sheets of rain. It was, a thunderstorm, basically, in the middle of wintertime, in the middle of Central California, where we're trying to get the shot. I thought, we have some shots, let's just call it a night. I can't ask more of these two guys. So, as we're sort of breaking down the set and throwing stuff into the car as quickly as possible because of the rains, I happened to overhear these two guys talking. And this was not meant for me. They were not talking so I will hear it, or, not just enough so I could hear it. I just caught it by accident. But I heard Jerry, the friend of the manager, talking to Jeff, the actual manager of the thing, saying, when Eric had me hold that umbrella a little further out, well, water started coming off the back of the umbrella, hit the back of my head. And it went down the back of my head, hit my neck, down my back, and into my pants. And then, just at that moment, I thought to myself, wow, this is very interesting that all this time we're taking these pictures. I'm thinking about me and this camera and this photograph and how great it will be, and this experience we shared. And I realized they shared a different experience, that because of this generosity and graciousness of these two guys, that, this guy, Jerry, who I had never met before and was just like a friend of somebody showing up to see what's going on, I put him into service, that because of his generosity and this amazing, service he did, he was actually at the top of this ladder, holding this umbrella for an hour in a driving rainstorm, with water coming off the back of the umbrella, hitting the back of his neck, down his back, into his pants. And for a solid hour, he stood there. He didn't whine or complain. He never said, hey man, this is not for me. He just took it as a service. I thought, when I finally figured all this out, I was so moved by their generosity that this is really a lesson in grace, that because of this amazing thing he's done for all of us now who get to look at this picture, it's a wonderful service that I just wanted to maybe share that as I used to think that these photographs are often very beautiful, or at least I like them, not so much because of my really great cameras, or I'm lucky with backgrounds, or I'm kind of neat with just the right subjects. I realize it's because of the generosity and graciousness of strangers toward me that allows these shots to happen. And I just thought it would be a nice thing to share with everybody. When you look at the picture, you're kind of aware of all this little backstory. As a matter of fact, if you look carefully at the photograph, and it might be hard to see on a monitor, but I think it still registers, look at the tires of the airplane itself. You can see a couple dark dots. That's the first few water drops actually falling on the set and the scene as we were taking our very first pictures. So the first thing I exposed of these 90 shots or so was the tires, because they're matte rubber and relatively not pure black. When they get pure black, because they get wet, then there's nothing to really light. There's no light or shadow. And the ground also, the asphalt itself, everybody knows the asphalt is dark. But when it gets wet, it's pitch black, and there'll be no difference between the light on the asphalt and the shadow of the asphalt because of the wing. So I photographed the ground first, and then the tires as first part of my first early shots, knowing that once they get wet, the whole shot's kind of ruined. I won't get any definition. So if you look closely, you can kind of see that. I thought it's kind of an interesting little observation. As sort of a final adjunct to the whole thing, you would think after all this sort of drama and water and stuff that's happened, we're done. But no, ultimately, we still had to put the airplane away. So In addition to getting stuck in the mud 2 or 3 times and breaking off 2 of those ejection nozzles that you see, spray out the chemicals from the bottom, we did finally get the whole thing put back. It was totally a mess and filthy and wet. But, I guess a little worse for the wear and tear, but I was told was repairable the next day. So, anyway, that's the story of the crop duster photo.